Yesterday you found the value that completes the square of a quadratic expression, and then you wrote the resulting expression as a binomial squared. Today you're going to use those steps and add a couple more to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. Here are the 6 steps that you need to follow for every single question, and we'll keep referring back to them as we solve the problems. I do want to change this problem right here. We're going to change it to x squared plus 8 equals negative 6. Okay, now we're ready to get started. Step number 1, collect the variable terms on one side of the equation, constants on the other. So, whoops, this needs to be an x here. Now we're going to move this 6x over, so plus 6x. Now we have x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So we have the variable terms on one side, we need the constants on the other. So there's just one constant here, which means we're going to subtract 8. And now we have x squared plus 6x. And yesterday you had to add something, so you were able to write it as a binomial squared. So we're just going to put a plus blank, which means when we write this is negative 8 on the other side. We need to put a plus blank because we're adding something to this side has to also be added to this side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take 6 divided by 2 and square it. That's going to give us 3 squared, which is 9. I added 9 to this side. This is what people forget a lot, to add it to both sides. So now we're going back to what you did yesterday. Yesterday, to write this as a binomial squared, you took the square root of the first term, the square root of the last term, and then you wrote it as a binomial, so 2 terms, squared. Take the square root of x squared, we get x. Square root of 9, we get 3. And you always, always, always take that first sign. Whoops, I said 3 and wrote 9. Square root of 9 is 3. And you always take the first sign and bring it down. So we want a plus sign here. Okay, now negative 8 plus 9 is just 1. Okay, our goal is to find values for x that will make that whole equation equal to 0. So this is what you did again yesterday. You went from this step to this step. Now we have an equation. So now we want to solve for x, which means I need to get it out of those parentheses. In order to do that, I have to get rid of squaring. So the next step is I take the square root of both sides, which is going to leave me with x plus 3 equals, and when you take the square root of 1, you have to say plus or minus 1, because we know that negative 1, if I square that, I get 1, and 1, if I square that, I get 1. Okay, so that means our answers, we're going to split this up here, and we're going to say x plus 3, when does x plus 3 equal positive 1, and when does x plus 3 equal negative 1? So if we subtract 3 from both sides, we're going to get x equals negative 2. Subtracting 3 here, we're going to get x equals negative 4. So those are the solutions, those are the values of x that I can substitute back into this equation and end up with 0. Okay, let's do the next example. Now, as I'm going through this, we need to make sure that the x squared term is 1. So I didn't mention it up here because it was already 1, but we need to make sure that the coefficient of the x squared term is 1. So what we're going to have to do, it says, as needed, divide both sides by a to make the coefficients of the x squared term 1. So this is not 1. We need to divide every term by 3. So now this is going to be x squared minus 8x equals 9. Okay, now step number 1, collect the variable terms on one side of the equations and the constants on the other. So we already have the variables on one side, constants on the other. And now we are going to Go to step number 2. As needed, divide both sides to make the coefficient of the x squared term 1. We did that. Complete the square. This is a step that you did yesterday. And I'm going to rewrite this so I can have a blank to fill in. So x squared minus 8x plus blank equals 9 plus blank. Alright, so we're going to take the negative 8, divide it by 2. We're going to square it. So that's going to give us negative 4 squared. We get 16. And before you do anything else, add that 16 to the other side. Okay, I'm running out of room here, so I'm just going to bring my whole problem over here, which is x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 25. Okay, now we're going to do what you did yesterday. We're going to take the square root of the first term, square root of the last term, and that's going to be x. We're going to bring the minus sign down, so minus 4 squared equals 25. All right, we want to solve for x, so what we need to do next is we need to take the square root of both sides. That'll take, taking the square root and squaring something undoes each other. So now we just have x minus 4 equals plus or minus 5. All right, we want to solve for x. So what we need to do is say, okay, when x minus 4 equals 5 and x minus 4 equals negative 5. So if we add 4 to both sides, I have x equals 9. Add 4 over here, I have x equals negative 1. So those are the values that you can substitute in your original equation, and you will end up with 0. Okay, now you have a couple to try.